Hi, I'm Mina Malik Hussain and you're watching The Coffee Table. Did you know that the first known menagerie of animals can be traced back to 2500 BCE? I did not know that. And that the first official public zoo that ever existed was set up in Paris in the 18th century? Yeah, I bet you didn't know that either. So we're going to talk about urban zoos, old zoos, what are zoos, why do we need zoos, the importance of zoos. I've said zoos a lot of times in this sentence. So joining me on set today are Dr. Ahmed Raza Khan, who works with Cargill, who is the best vet in the land, and is a dairy consultant. And if you have any animal questions, he's the man to ask. And we have also got Dr. Uzma Khan, the Dr. Khan's on set today, who works with the WWF, who is working on a project that is working to conserve and rescue river dolphins and all sorts of amazing conservation work. So thank you so much and welcome to the set, guys. It's really great to have both of you.
Thank you very much.
Great, sort of animal experts on the set. So Dr. Saab, tell me, you've worked with the Lahore Zoo for over 10 years. You've been on the committee.
Yeah.
And of course, in your career as a very sought after vet, how do you think, what role do you see zoos playing in our sort of urban experience?
Yeah. Thank you very much. First I must compliment you and Indus for bringing up a very important subject.
Why, thank you.
Secondly, going back to my own childhood, one of the first memories that really still stays in my mind is visiting the Lahore Zoo. And it was an absolutely wonderful experience. Now, in this context, if you see how the zoos are defined, how a zoo is defined, for instance, the term started off with the zoological garden.
Yes.
Right? And you've gone back to zillion years, But if we keep, sort of something which is still trackable,
Yes.
London apparently was the one where this activity started. I think 1860s, as you rightly said.
Or in sort of 1793,
Yeah.
it was the first zoo was set up in Paris.
Correct.
After the revolution. They
Correct.
took all the nobles' private animals and put them into a public zoo
Yeah.
and made it open to the masses.
Correct.
Everybody could access them.
But this London example is a little bit relevant because, number one, it laid the foundation of the modern sort of, how they were going to evolve. And we must remember it started off because these are wild animals, and it started off as a scientific project, not as a facility.
Yes.
So after continuing just in the context of science and studying these animals,
And
behavior-wise,
zoology as
and
a-
zoology
as
as
a
a
sort of
subject.
discipline.
Exactly. Then, after about 4 or 5 years, it was open to public.
Oh, okay.
So that's how it started off,
Right.
and that's how it's been. Now, zoo, the term zoo was also coined by London Zoo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It must be Greek or something.
Yeah. So from zoological gardens, it became zoo.
Zoo.
Now, zoo, right from the beginning, meant wild animals kept in either cages or enclosures for public to have a look at them.
Yeah.
And the only criteria in the beginning used to be that they just might breed. Also.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. So, and plus, whether they did or not was not really, something.
Okay, so they could be stuffed also. They could just be maybe specimens that were stuffed animals or...
I am basically talking about, how sort of we then progress to how, where we are at the moment.
Right.
So that's how it started, and it continued to this day like that. The only difference is that from that London, sort of initiative, it then diverged to various, other broader aspects, because then the animal welfare people came in, animal welfare issues came in,
Yes.
then animal rights came in. So they put a lot of pressure. And we'll, sort of continue with the discussion later. But that's how it started off.
Right.
Our zoo, Lahore Zoo, as Uzma and myself, we've known each other in this context for a long time. This was also the same time. I think 1880s.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
Lahore Zoo is one of the oldest in the world.
So I'm assuming that at that time, did the British set it up?
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Everything was, British. SPCA, like Usma was mentioning, the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.
We have an SPCA. It's very important to know
very
this.
important.
Audience, we have an SPCA that watches out for animals, and you can contact them if you are watching out for animals as well. Dr. Uzma, you have also worked with the zoo for many years, and of course, as a professional who works on animals, it seems a sort of natural thing to do. But also, very interestingly, you work with the WWF, and you specialize in conservation, right? So, can you tell us about the work that you're doing with the rivers? Because I find that really interesting as well. So, you're talking like river dolphins, and what's that project about?
Okay, so this is a River Dolphin initiative, which is a global initiative of WWF. So as you may know, that Pakistan has one species out of five species that are found in the world. So I think
Indus River dolphin.
We are very proud of it.
Because everybody knows about them.
Yes. And it's actually one of the only, it's the only species out of five, which is showing an increasing trend. So back in 2001, we had about 1,000, 1,100 dolphins, but now we have 2,000. So, the population has actually doubled.
That's tremendous.
That's tremendous.
And you were telling me previously that dolphins don't breed that fast because they're mammals and they do it in a very sort of almost
So they are like humans,
way.
right? So yes, but I think because of the very intensive conservation work that has been going around the Sindh area, the protection is more, the conservation work is very focused. I think the species has responded. Because earlier on, you would see hunting of dolphins. There were communities that actually they were eating dolphins. So none of that is going on because of very, very good conservation work. And Sindh Wildlife Department is actually very active. There's not much work which is focused in Punjab, but Sindh has the biggest population. And it's very focused, so very good work.
So I find it really interesting that a lot of, one argument for having zoos is that there can be a great deal of conservation work done under the aegis of a zoo, in a sort of zoo space. But here we are with our wonderful dolphins who, without a zoo environment, are doing really well in the river all by themselves.
Yes.
That's really remarkable.
But here I would like to point out the role of a zoo, because you know that Lahore Zoo was actually involved in the conservation work for the Indus River dolphin.
Do tell, because Lahore is here. And
that's where, because we wanted to tag river dolphins, we translocate river dolphins regularly from canals to the mainstream of the river, and you need the veterinary support.
Yes.
So back in 15 years ago, we had Zoo Vet, which was involved. He used to make trips to the field and regularly provide that support. Then we put together a project which was a collaboration between Lahore Zoo and Sindh Wildlife Department.
Okay.
And we pitched it for UNDP Jeff Small Grants Program. And that's how the zoo really got involved in field conservation work.
Ooh.
And this was, I would say, the first example from Pakistan where our zoos got involved in situ work. Otherwise, globally, you find various examples where zoos are actively involved in the conservation of endangered species in the wild. So not just keeping them in enclosures, but actually going out in the field and helping and making a difference.
Because they've got that technical know-how, they've got the vets, they've got the infrastructure.
They have the capacity, yes.
I was reading about San Diego Zoo, and they have they've been rearing cranes, certain sort of cranes that are local to the area. And that's basically, you don't find that bird anywhere else now, except at San Diego Zoo, because that's where they're breeding them. And then but I just find it's really heartening to see that, but this was the first time that our zoo was actually involved in this kind of hands-on thing.
But there are globally, there are various examples. There are various species that the population went down. For example, the California condor. There were just 20 animals left. And it was because of the concerted effort of zoos that brought back the species. So, by breeding and release programs. So zoos have very important functions to play if you use them in the right way.
Yeah.
And if I may, sort of add to it, because I have witnessed it myself. We were at Head Tonsa, and we have seen, it's now, last year, a very frequent sighting. You're going on the river in a boat, and suddenly, you see them, come out
Leaping.
and leaping,
Yeah.
and it's
that's so
an
lovely.
absolute, delight.
Yes.
Because we were all sort of very, concerned the way at the rate at which they were disappearing.
And since you are also out in the field quite often, and it's a sort of first-hand experience seeing one. For example, I don't see vultures in Lahore anymore because the trees are gone, so the bird has gone, and there used to be so many.
But that's not the reason for their decline.
Correct.
What is the
It's actually the veterinary drug which has caused it. What? Yes, it's diclofenac sodium.
It's a drug.
Oh.
It's not just a veterinary drug. It's actually, something which is called. We were also very surprised at that. I've met the gentleman who did the research on vultures, actually. And it's a human medicine which is also used in veterinary practice.
Right.
And the strangest thing for me as a vet was to find out that it's so toxic that if an animal dies that has had the drug, because it has a very long withdrawal period, as we call it, diclofenac sodium.
It stays in the system.
It stays in the system. So if an animal dies, and vultures obviously,
scavengers.
eat off the carrion, and just a very small quantity can, is lethal for them. And, giving the drug to a big animal, let's say 400-500 kg, and for that drug to be in the meat, the quantity is very small. And vulture is not a small bird.
No, that's right.
But it's so toxic.
But even that small amount is enough.
Small amount is enough.
Oh my
so
gosh.
that's why they've now, the use is very limited, but it's still sort of continuing. That's
So
one of the.
what happened was that there was actually a decline of up to 99% of the vultures, two species of vultures in the subcontinent.
Across the subcontinent,
yeah,
so not
because-
just our part. Wow, okay.
So there are actually three species, and Pakistan has two of them. So now what happened was that we, WWF, along with other organizations, we got the veterinary diclofenac banned in 2000.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well done. I shake your hand
Thank you.
on behalf of the vultures.
Yes, I'm sure they are recovering now. So actually, we have seen a bit of recovery in the population in some areas, but in Punjab still the.
But I have a
status is-
I have a very basic sounding question. Is that then why can't we just sort of take some vultures and put them in the zoo and then
This
just
is
kind of breed
exactly
them
what's
there?
happening.
That's exactly
not
what-
not in zoos though, but it is a facility which was set up. It was, I think, 2007 to be precise. We set up a facility in Changamanga Forest.
Right.
So if you want to ever go and see it, you can see it. And it's a breeding facility for vultures. It's also for education. So we have visitors coming in, but the vultures have bred there. And we plan to start releasing them after about a year or so, because we can experiment how they go.
How they respond in the wild.
yes.
So do you think that sort of birds that are bred in captivity, how will they do in the wild?
Okay, so there are various procedures one has to follow. It's called hacking for birds of prey.
Ooh.
So you
See them on a tiny computer.
so it's a very soft release process.
like this.
Yeah.
It's a very soft release process. You keep them in the wild and you make a nest, and you start feeding them there. So, they are out in the wild, but they are not fledged yet. So you start feeding them. And then since they are not those sort of birds that are hunters,
Yes.
they are scavengers, so it's slightly easier. So hacking is a gradual process that you take up, and it's a soft release that you do.
Excellent. But it's so heartening to know that things are happening and we're just going to...
Yeah,
We
exactly.
always highlight negative stories,
Correct.
but there are
I
lots
agree
of
with that.
positive conservation work going on.
Absolutely. Yes. We're going to take a quick break and more positive, wonderful animal stories and zoos when we come back. Hi, welcome back to the show. We're talking about animals and all the excellent conservation work that is happening here in Pakistan to protect our species, but we're also going to talk more about zoos. So, Dr. Raza, we've got a zoo in Lahore, we've got a zoo in Karachi, we've got one in Islamabad, we've got one in Peshawar. We have one in Balochistan.
Not that I know of.
Yeah,
Not that
and
I
there
know
is
of.
one in Bahawalpur also.
Okay, all right.
It specializes in breeding lions. So
Really?
Yeah, so
I didn't know that. Wow. So it's just a lion zoo.
primarily, yes.
That's so good. But then what do they do with the lions? Do they go to other zoos?
Other zoos, precisely.
Oh.
And plus, they are open. They have a few safaris here now.
Okay.
So that's how it's, sort of channeling out of the
Right.
Bahawalpur.
But can I chip in something here? The problem is that Bahawalpur Zoo, okay, the big cats, as Dr. Raza would also know, big cats breed very easily. So there's not like really a rocket science breeding big cats.
Okay.
What is a challenge is breeding a small cat. When I mean small cat, I mean fishing cat, for example. We have had fishing cats in zoos, and
What's a fishing cat?
it's a fishing cat. Okay,
I keep really like some T.S. Eliot story in my mind with a little fishing rod. There's a little cat.
no, fishing cat. It's a species
Okay.
of a wild cat that is found in
All right.
Pakistan as
Sort
well.
of like a polecat.
They are beautiful. They have their beautiful pattern, and they.
But how big are they? Sort of
Oh, it's a smallish
small,
cat.
like this-ish. Okay.
And they hunt actually. They
Right.
eat fish.
Oh.
Yeah, so
off
that's
the,
why they are
off the streams.
Yes.
Oh, like
yeah.
bears, with this
Yeah.
Yes.
and just sort of
Precisely.
snatch
I
a
don't know,
fish.
like a bear or
But you like snatch a fish out of the river,
Yeah, correct.
kind of thing.
Streams, small streams.
Okay.
breeding them is a challenge, and they've had like Karachi Zoo. I know they had fishing cat. I know that
Yeah.
Lahore Zoo once caught one specimen. So that's where zoos need to cooperate and start a
Dialogue with each other also.
Yes.
Where they can help each other.
So
do what's
going back to
required.
the lions, so Bahawalpur Zoo bred a lot of lions, and they have actually sold over 200, if I'm not wrong, 200 lion cubs to private owners.
Private owners?
Now,
is that
I think
allowed?
that's allowed, unfortunately, and it's very counterproductive to the mandate of a zoo that
Yes.
you're selling to private facilities. You don't even know what happens to them. That's where I disagree with how zoos are functioning in this country, because some zoos in the past have been selling their animals to private owners. And recently, I would not like to name, but there's another government zoo that wants to auction its lion cubs. Now, without any monitoring system, we should not be doing it, and selling an animal, a wild animal,
And
is
an
absolutely unacceptable in today's world.
And a lion cub or any kind of exotic animal requires a level of care that is probably just impossible to do privately.
Yes, because you can't meet their needs. We often get complaints from individuals that, oh, there's a lion in a house. Is it legal? But yes, it is legal, and we need to change our the whole legislative framework, because we should not be allowing dangerous animals and endangered species in private custody in residential areas.
Or anywhere for that matter.
In zoos, and specialized collection in zoos, and
Where they have the expertise to look
they have
after
the
this kind of
expertise,
animal.
and they can provide for their care and welfare.
Appropriate sort of
Yeah.
care for it.
If we look back, there have been a lot of countries, Japan for instance, a lot of states in the US, who have allowed all sorts of pet animals to be kept as pets, because there were these so-called orientation programs, and
Okay,
anybody who said that yes, he or she is willing to take that chance, they were given. So people had pythons, people had lions, people had bears, for instance.
Wow.
Now, with time, they've very sort of quickly found out that these animals look very cute when they are
Small, yes.
and especially sort of feeding out of a bottle, feeding milk
Yes.
out of a bottle. Everybody calls them very cute and stuff. What people don't realize that they grow very quickly, and they are coming from the wild.
Yes.
And they have all those instincts still intact.
Of course.
And it's only after a disaster. For instance, if a big cat begins to misbehave, so
Yes.
the owner has to save him or herself.
Yes.
They will just, sort of chuck them out of the house and shut the doors inside, and the cat would be out on the
On the
streets.
loose.
And then the police would be, sort of chasing them and trying to tranquilize them, or, sort of trying. So this now, unfortunately, is sort of still going on. Now, once when a lion grows out of control, all that machoism sort of disappears very quickly. So they shut the animal in a cage, which is a disaster. So the more furious the animal is, the smaller the cage.
The cages.
And then, it's very difficult for anybody to, sort of
Interact with it,
with the
yes.
animal, shift it. So, I mean, I absolutely agree with Uzma. It is a problem. It's a serious problem. And there are other much productive ways to, for disposal of these animals.
And their care. And a handler is not just somebody who feeds an animal. I'm sure that being a handler for an exotic or a wild animal requires a whole different skill set.
See, we often talk about animal welfare.
Yes.
Animal welfare has, a clear-cut definition. It means if an animal has 5 freedoms,
Right.
it is meeting the requirements of its welfare.
Right.
which
Regardless
are-
of where it is.
and what it is. So if I, sort of try to recall those 5 freedoms, number 1 is freedom from hunger and thirst,
Right.
and then freedom from pain and injury, disease and injury, and then freedom from pain.
Right.
And also freedom to sort of move around in
Yes.
the
Freedom
to avoid
express its normal behavior
express its
repertoire.
normal behavior. Yeah.
Express its normal behavior. I love the
Yeah.
word express. Because
Correct.
it's sort of, they
And,
have feelings.
And so if an animal is meeting all these requirements, irrespective of what species it is and where it is.
Yes.
In zoos, like, I mentioned this definition in the beginning, there is a zoo exhibit and there is an enclosure or a cage.
Yes.
Because it's an object of display. Zoos evolved and evolved in a way that, people really made an effort to give these 5 freedoms to the animal.
To the animals.
What we lacked in this evolutionary process, and despite the fact that Lahore Zoo is also one of the oldest ones, was that we deviated from our focus on animals
Yes.
and concentrated more on the commercial activities within the zoo. And we
okay.
have witnessed it many times that, they have these, which is also very good. But now there are restaurants, there is a very noisy train there, and there is
Yes.
this big wheel, and, it's a very noisy sort of activity. And then there was also for quite a long time a move to open the zoo at night also.
Oh,
So
goodness.
all the animals would be disturbed because,
You can't have people in noise and lights interrupting their nighttime schedule.
Correct. So the activity was to start with after 10 in the evening and continue well into the night. So that meant, yes, you're very right, that, flashing lights on animals. And that was totally unacceptable. So we were, a part of the zoo management committee at that time, and I think we were very lucky to ward that
Yes,
thing off.
to squash it immediately.
Yes, squashing is not something very easily done there. Otherwise,
No, I imagine. And I also read somewhere that urban zoos, especially older zoos, they don't have the space to expand either.
Correct. That's how it is. Zoo has a website. Lahore Zoo has a website. Whatever they mention on it is correct.
Yes.
But then it also has, for instance, it's an oasis within the within the
heart of the city, right in the middle.
And like I mentioned, I still remember there used to be, these, we call it flying fox, these big bats by the thousands there. And there were a lot of these, small and big rodents, which were not caged or anything, but they were, since it was a safe place for them, so we would find them a lot.
Just kind of walking around the zoo?
Yeah, correct.
In the trees and just hanging out. That's so nice.
Yeah. But now with the passage of time, their population is diminishing and it's become much more noisier around it. Inside, it's more or less the same. And also, with these, with the mortalities also, unfortunately, there is because of lack of education, there is no interest. Education for zoos would mean, I remember
this is a very important thing, is to educate people who come to zoos as well.
It's the kids, basically. Yes. I remember my best times have been when I've been invited in schools to have a talk about pets and animals with kids. Yeah. I've been to grammar school a lot of times, been to Lahore American school a lot of times. I love the shine in their eyes, the interest, and then they ask all sorts of questions. With zoos, it becomes a lot more interesting because these are amazing. You have these facts which really bewilder kids. Yeah. For instance, a giraffe has such a long neck.
Yes.
But a giraffe has the same number of vertebrae in the neck as me and you. So it's a, it's a fact. We have 7 vertebrae. A giraffe would have the same sort of ability.
I'm sure that the size is much larger.
I'm sure. I mean, you can have a look at it and see. But these are, sort of amazing facts.
Yes.
So that's what would attract kids and, we call it zoo tourism. Yeah. We need to have a zoo guide. We've talked about it a lot of times. If you go anywhere else, in Europe or, the zoo guide will give you a tour of animals and would describe things that, these are unimaginable.
And that's so great because especially for younger children who can't read, for example, there is information on a plaque, but if you have a person who's talking to you about it, and especially for us where a lot of people who come to the zoo might not be able to read what's written there. If you had a person, a professional who could just sort of be there and talk to people about animals and to humanize them. Because culturally, we're not very good at seeing animals. So we're just going to take a quick break and come back to zoos and animals. So don't go away. Hi, welcome back to the show. We're talking about zoos and how if you have a feel for animals, that you should consider being a handler at the zoo because you'd be really good at that job. So, Dr. Uzma, tell me, the WWF, I'm sure, does these kind of educational outreach programs to help sensitize people to animals and caring about their welfare, doing things.
We have various programs, but just focusing on zoos. WWF supported the first ever education program in a zoo back in 1998 when I was hired to be the education officer for Lahore Zoo, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So yes, because the primary objective of any zoo is public education. So if we look at the stats from the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, it says that about 700 million people visit zoos annually, in a global context.
That's a lot of people.
That's a huge potential to change behaviors of people, to, bring about, change for conservation globally.
Correct.
And in Pakistan alone, if we take 3 zoos, Karachi, Lahore and Islamabad, there are about 8 million people visiting annually. So, there's a huge potential for public awareness. Because
And a kind of meaningful awareness, where it's
Yes.
not just sort of going and sort of throwing a peanut at a monkey or holding up your baby in front of a bear, which people have done.
What I always tell the zoos is like, if you have African lion, you should use them to tell a story of extinction of Asiatic lion from
Yes.
Pakistan. So, why did it become extinct? So, tell that story. So it's not about, okay, looking at a lion and it has the mane and this is the
Exactly.
female.
It's
and
not
this-
just an object to gawp at.
Yeah, correct.
It's like, linking it with field conservation and how we can help, it's important for people to know how they can contribute, what behavioral change can we make in ourselves to have an impact, so this is what's important.
Because the main justification for having any zoo is education, is that zoologists have a place to observe animals, that children have a place, if you are interested in animals, there's a place where you can go and see them interacting in a certain environment.
There is another thing that it's very commonly said that people tend to behave towards animals the way you present them. So if you present them respectfully, people tend to be respectful.
Right.
If you lock them in cages and in menageries, people are going to think of them as something below them. So presenting animals in a respectful way is a gap that we see in most of the zoos, and some zoos, I think Lahore Zoo is the best zoo in Pakistan right now. But other zoos need to evolve, and then
More work needs to be done because
on animal welfare, on improving the enclosures, and in Pakistan generally we don't have a zoo legislation.
Okay.
Zoo standards, we don't have so if you asked, I think earlier in the program, how many zoos are here in Pakistan? The answer is we don't know, because we don't have a complete database of how many zoos, how many private zoos. We need that, and we need that a central body that's monitoring the zoos and helping to improve them. So that's where a huge gap is. That's where generally people also show their concern that what is going on. We really need to improve. And we need some standards and legislative framework.
Yeah, it's a very important point, and usually when you talk about sort of improvements or bringing about a change or something, the next best sort of thing that comes to everybody's mind is budget.
Yes.
And you'll be surprised that Lahore Zoo is one of those very few
Bodies.
that have more income than expenditure. So
Wow,
they
it's
have
turning a profit.
they don't have any budget or funds issues basically. What we have always tried, it has sort of done some good also. What we have tried to sort of channel it towards animals' well-being as well. Lahore Safari, sort of came about. It's an old thing, but it sort of, presents its modern look now, which is not very sort of old.
Is a safari sort of like a kind of protected environment?
Safari is basically, sort of, I hope Uzma agrees with my definition. It's basically where animals roam around freely, and you have the people can go and have a look at animals within the,
a designated
by being
kind
safe.
of framework, place
So
where you can observe them.
Lahore Safari is a very small thing. Otherwise, in Africa, you can spend days in a safari. So coming back to it, if the funds are channeled properly, the other thing is this structure of zoo management committees, for instance. In one tenure, it's not really possible to bring about all the things
Changes
which
required.
are necessary as into a plan.
And then absence of legislation obviously doesn't help either.
Correct.
Yes.
So there has to be a continuous process. There are sometimes a lot of changes within the zoo management. Some people come and stay for a little while, and they are interested also. Sometimes the turnover is so rapid that whatever has been happening, good, it begins to stall, and somebody new comes in and has.
So it sounds very sort of administrative, and there's a lot of sort of bureaucratic
But the thing
channels
is
to
that-
navigate. But it just seems really unfair that if a zoo like Lahore does have a budget,
Yeah.
then surely then our giraffes shouldn't be dying
But the thing
because
is,
they
this is
swallowed
what
a plastic bag.
I was about to say, it's not about the money. It's about
How to, correct.
understanding and having that awareness at all levels. For example, 2 years ago, the only elephant Lahore Zoo had kept.
Yes.
It
Susie.
died. Susie. She died. She was just 36, 37.
Which is not that old for an elephant.
Which is like half their age.
correct.
Oh.
So she died, and they have the lifespan and the whole life cycle like humans. So, they also live up to 65, 70 years. She passes away, and now there is this huge public pressure that we have to have an elephant. And people don't care if it's one elephant, but they need to see an elephant. And this pressure is at all levels. It's not just from public, from media, but from media as well.
Wasn't me.
And, from various other higher ups as well.
And the thing is that the symbolism of having an elephant in the zoo.
So Lahore Zoo, is going to spend 50 million to get an elephant, cover its freight, which is so expensive, everything.
Where will the elephant come from?
From Africa. It will be a wild-caught elephant.
Oh, gosh.
So, and
Don't we have
the
Indian
worst
elephants
thing,
anymore?
Asian elephants, yes.
we
but
can't
they
get
are,
one, I
no, we
guess.
can't, because their population is much smaller.
Oh, okay.
The only way we should get elephants is from other zoos where they're captive bred.
Correct.
But having said this, I think we should not have elephants in captivity because they have a very complex social structure. And actually, globally, zoos are phasing out their elephants because
they?
you can't meet their social and, physiological social requirements.
Like even the best zoo can't mimic that at all.
There are very absolutely correct, Uzma. There are clear examples, even which are not too old also. There is a zoo in the States that have, sort of gotten the animal out.
London Zoo has as well.
London Zoo
They have closed down their elephant enclosure.
Not only because the pressure, but by actually having a sort of a look at the way the animal, the elephant is kept there,
Yes.
and this.
And you have a relationship with that animal.
Space requirement, and here Susie's role was sort of not as much as being an exhibit, but to sort of have that harness on top and
And she was a sort of a celebrity of the zoo.
Yeah, but I think that's where we need to have public awareness
Exactly.
that elephants suffer, If you want to see an elephant, you see it in
happy.
National Geographic programs or go
That's
to
the best.
Look it
some
up on the
safari.
internet. Because
Yeah, but-
sometimes even the best or most well-meaning zoo can't provide the kind of habitat that an animal needs to thrive in. And that's where we need to sort of also then balance our own desire for knowledge or observation or information with what's actually good or best for a living creature.
Even within their own environment, we just want to add another comment on elephants. People have made mistakes which nobody could imagine.
Right.
For instance, they were building a railway in Africa,
Right.
and it was going through the same area where elephants used to roam around. Now, railway track going through that land obviously needed a fence also. Otherwise, these...
Yes, they would just crush it. They'd just walk on
crush it, and plus an elephant coming in
front of the track.
In front of the train. It's not a very, sort of
It's not
good
helpful.
thing. It's not helpful at all. So they built it and they divided the whole area. Now, the elephant herd is run by a matriarch. She's the one who knows everything about, her experience, where the water is,
Yes.
which can be, sort of literally 300, 400 miles away. And where the fodders are, how are the pastures.
Right.
So if an area doesn't get enough rain, or so that means its water sources are depleted. So
And you
the
can sort of
elephants couldn't go.
bisect the habitat.
Yeah, and then they couldn't go to areas which were which the elephants for centuries were used to visiting, because it was cordoned off. Likewise, human, sort of interventions. We have these very fancy safari parks, wildlife parks, which have these tens of thousands of hectares land.
Yes.
But then the human beings move in.
Yes.
And they sort of, cut off their roots.
Their roots.
And then they come into conflicts with wild animals.
That's really tricky,
It's-
sort of, we mean well, but there's still many mysteries about, the
even-
wild animal universe.
The only
world,
point
not
that I am trying to make is that even in the wilderness, in their own habitat, they can sometimes suffer.
Yes.
Because of natural calamities and everything.
But at least it's not humans sort of
So
making mistakes on them.
Correct. But zoos were created, to help them thrive, and but for that you need, sort of some sort of that same replication, which in certain animals it's scientifically proven, time has proven it and tested it, that is just not possible. And we see the behavior, what the outcome is.
So zookeeping requires a great deal of intuition and thought and empathy for an animal in order to be a space where they can actually
Correct. And
thrive.
plus
And I think we
Yeah.
have to wrap up the show.
And we don't need, to reinvent the wheel all the time. We have a lot of examples, where zoos have evolved in situations where, yes, they are good money-making bodies, but also their main focus is on the well-being, or you call it animal welfare as well.
Where they're thriving and they're
Where
happy. So and everybody is happy. So there's a lot of work yet to be done. There's a lot of work that's already happening, but it's very heartening to know that, we have people who know what they're doing and we have a plan. So thank you so much, both of you, for being on the set today. This is a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I'm very proud of my giraffe vertebrae in my neck. Thank you all for watching. I hope you are proud of your vertebrae also. And we will see you next time on the coffee table. Bye now.